if you had joined us in our previous study, the 7 Years' War was a global war between several allied powers, and that lasted from 1756 to 1763 for a total of 7 years. Very good. Excellent. Very good. Yes. You can do the king's math. That's right. In fact, halfway through, there was a new king who ascended to the throne, George William Frederick. He assumed the throne of Great Britain on October 25, 1760. Known as George III, he saw the war won to great success and expansion of the empire. He was not, as is commonly believed by many, a raving tyrant. The 22-year-old king was born June 4th, 1738, 2 months premature, and survived in 1738. Quite remarkable. He would marry the 17-year-old Princess Charlotte of the Holy Roman Empire the following year after he ascended to the throne. Their wedding day was the first time they had ever met. Quite charming, yes. King George was a faithful, praying man who was devoutly faithful to his wife. And the way George lived his life was one in which the press could not stand it. It was abominable. He did not make for any good tabloids. He was, like many other kings in the past, he was faithful to his wife. What king does that? He was boring. He was a very educated, sophisticated man. He was educated in commerce, agriculture, constitutional law, chemistry, physics, mathematics, astronomy, Latin, French, history, geography, music, and was an accomplished writer, fencer, and dancer. Yes, indeed. He had very poor taste, though. Absolutely disgraceful. He would go out to his country home once his kingly duties were finished, put on peasant clothes, and do manual labor. Scandalous! Scandalous! What king does that? Can you imagine a head of state going out and cutting brush? Never be done such a thing. So his life of faith and of great morals, he donated more than half of his income to charities. He abhorred immoral behavior, could not stand it. He would not tolerate it in his administration. He would call people out in public for their immoral behavior and absolutely insisted on teaching biblical virtues to his and Queen Charlotte's 15 children. Couldn't fit them all in the painting. 9 sons, 6 daughters they had. He was also extremely loyal to the empire. He had a profound reverence for the kingdom, believing that no one person, including himself, was more important than the empire. And that's not funny. You did that. You snuck that. The empire, because of his reverence and respect for it, most in the world had great respect for the king. May not have appreciated his tastes and the way he lived his life with very little flamboyance, but they greatly respected him. Now, this empire has just completed a 7 Years' War. And yes, it was very victorious, and there had been newly acquired territories, great expansion, but there was also great cost, and therefore great debt. And so these newly acquired territories, plus the very profitable American colonies, and the whole of England. Since everyone benefited from the war, everyone should get to help repay for the war. And thus taxes were imposed with the advice and consent of His Majesty's Cabinet, His Privy Council, and the Parliament, as everything was done in perfect constitutional law. Everything was done according to the law. Both England and the American colonies were taxed. In fact, in England, it was even a harder, heavier tax burden. Everything done, though, according to law, the way it should be done. There was only one problem, though. Back in the American colonies, as they might say, well, they ain't never done like that before. And so this came as not something that was very well welcomed. For you see, for 150 years, the colonies had been very loyal British subjects, doing all the great things that helped profit the kingdom while maintaining their own self-rule. England, the king, the parliament, they're 2 months away by vote across the Atlantic. And so we determined here our own policies, including our own taxes. And we pretty much ran things. Britain and the Treasury had always benefited from the way we were doing things here with the trade and the commerce. So why change things now? Don't like change. That's why we sit in the same pew. The king and parliament, they were smart about it too, how they went about it. The very first thing they did was not pass a tax, but took advantage of a political situation called Pontiac's Rebellion. Yes, that is where the name comes from. Several Indian tribes were upset that Britain had won the war and had now taken control of the territory. They had been loyal to the French, and thus Chief Pontiac and those who had joined him were attacking forts and settlements throughout the western frontier, to the point that 4,000 settlers from western Virginia and Pennsylvania had to flee from their homes. So the Parliament, seeing this and realized you never let a good crisis go to waste, decided they would take action. And they did. King George made his royal proclamation of 1763, of which you can see a facsimile out on the display table. This proclamation established a new western boundary to all colonies. Now, to us, that's, well, what's the big deal about that? But to these original colonies, this was a big deal. All of their original charters showed what was their western boundary. Nothing. Nothing was a western boundary. Their charters had for them to have westward expansion for however long the colony continued to grow, for the glory of the king's kingdom. And so it could possibly go to the Mississippi, it could possibly go all the way to the next ocean. But now the king has made this proclamation, and now all of a sudden we are shut off, and that's it. That's the end. No further westward expansion. That did not set well with the colonists, because that was in violation of their charters. Not to mention, this gives excuse, this crisis, that we have to have British regulars stationed all along the western boundary. Really? Troops standing in peacetime. That's a violation of the English Bill of Rights, as signed by His Majesty King William and Mary of Orange. So this is quite a problem. Additionally, not only do we have troops all along the western frontier, which will make it very difficult to have westward expansion, and also make it quite a little easier to find people for taxing. His Majesty's royal officials will now take care of all Native American relations. Well, again, that ain't how like we've done, however it is you people speak. That's not how we've ever done before. So As you may recall from previous lesson, the relations with the natives was different depending on where you're at. How were they in Jamestown? Very bad, yes. Except for the occasion of John Smith and John Rolfe, very bad, not good. In Plymouth, though, how were relations? Great. Exceptionally great. Yes, they were. And continue to be so with Massachusetts and the other colonies. Most people don't realize, but most of the colonial land was purchased, negotiated, and purchased from Native American tribes. It was not conquered in great warfare and the slaughtering of innocent. Instead, it was purchased, and many times, purchased meant multiple times, because there were multiple tribes that laid claim to the land. And to be fair and just, to make sure no one was treated unequally, we just paid them all for the purchase of the land. And many times, they made out way better than the people purchasing the land, just letting you know. So, the relations, then, you would establish friendship with the native tribe from whom you purchased the land and did commerce with them. But then all of a sudden, out of the blue, you may be attacked by somebody. And you say, but I thought we had an understanding with the natives. Turns out you do. Which means the enemy of those natives are now your enemy, and you had no idea. So as you can see, the history of relations with the natives, the best way to explain it was complicated. They did their best, and for most of the time it was peaceful. Occasionally you had unfortunate circumstances where it was not. Sometimes the colonist's fault, sometimes the natives' fault. But it had pretty much worked out, and there wasn't much of an issue going on at the time. But now His Majesty's officials think they can walk in and handle all of this? Oh, wonderful. That's going to turn out great. Or not. So, in the midst of all this, it's only going downhill from here. Now comes the establishment of how we're going to get the money we need from these people who can't move away. The writs, a fancy word for contracts of assistance, all within the Navigation Acts, are rules that say the colonists now can trade with Great Britain and Great Britain. Cannot do trade with France, can't do trade down in the West Indies, can't do trade to India, can't do trade with anybody except through only commerce of England. You want to trade something with France, you have to go through England first, because guess who's going to collect the fees for all that? Anyone found doing business outside of the mother country would be subject to imprisonment with no trial by jury. Now, as an English citizen, what am I guaranteed as one of my rights? Trial by jury. Yet now, if I'm found in violation of this one particular law, I immediately lose my right as an Englishman? That's rather unsettling. Well, then came the Sugar Act. His Majesty's Parliament said that the way to increase the treasury of the kingdom is to have a tax that is mostly just on the wealthy. We're only going to tax the top 1%. That's all we're going to do. And just the wealthy will pay the taxes. And that is what the Sugar Act was. It was a tax on things usually the wealthy could have, like sugar, for one. That was a commodity that was mostly for the wealthy. Wine, coffee, pimentos, and silk. And it was also on exports of lumber, iron, flour, cheese, and farm products. I'm sure you've never heard of such a concept as only taxing the rich. This may come as a shock to you, though, that history has revealed to us that those who say they're going to tax only the rich and proceed to do so, guess who they end up taxing eventually? Everyone. Because of the inability to provide that which was promised through taxing only the rich. So it usually expands from there, and everybody falls prey to the taxes. This is why it is an American value that tax rates reflect freedom. Because the more the government takes of your money, what happens to the ability of you to do whatever you want with your money? It decreases. However, the more of your money you're able to keep, what does that do to your freedom regarding your money? The more you can do. So the higher the taxes, the less liberty. The lower the taxes, the greater the freedom. That's just a plain fact of America and how we were established as a country, because we understood that. Because here's the irony of all of it. Who determines who is rich? The ones collecting the taxes. How convenient is that? The Currency Act of 1764 said all these taxes, by the way, must be paid in gold or silver, not colonial print money. Now, how many of you poor farmers out there have a stash of gold and silver lying around to pay your bills? This is, by definition, a hardship. Makes it very difficult, because now you have to find means of acquiring gold and silver to pay whatever taxes are levied upon you. There's the Quartering Act and the Stamp Act of 1765. The Stamp Act was a tax on, guess who? Everybody. We didn't want you to feel left out. And so what happened was you now had to have a government-issued stamp on all papers, such as documents, wills, deeds, licenses, magazines, newspapers, playing cards, and other such items that was deemed necessary to have a stamp on, possibly even on games of ice. For example, out on the display table, you will see and center on display some items that date to the Revolutionary era, and one of them is an itty-bitty little dice, and if you look very closely, there's a red marking on it. That is an actual stamp from the Stamp Act of 1765. So if you want to see one of those actual items there, legitimate, it's on display out there this evening. If you did not get the stamp, whatever it is you had was not valid. So think of that regarding the deed to your property that has been in your family for 5 generations since Charles II. All of a sudden, without the official stamp, it is completely invalid. And guess what the government can come and do now? Seize your property, yes. How well do you think this went over in the colonies? This was a breaking point. And thus they issued a message to Parliament, to the king, as one voice. The Stamp Act Congress assembled. This had never happened before, where representatives from all the colonies came together and tried to do something. They did. They sent a message to Parliament. And because of that, they repealed the Stamp Act. It was almost surprising, but hey, wonderful. This means our relationship is still intact. We can still discuss these things and work to a compromise, except that it was immediately followed by the Declaratory Act of 1766, in which Parliament said, hello, let us introduce ourselves. We are Parliament. This may be a paraphrase, just saying. We are Parliament. You are the king's subjects. We will tax you anywhere, any place, any time. Thank you for visiting. That was pretty much the Declaratory Act. And then it was followed by action. The Townshend Acts of 1767. Taxes on paper, glass, lead, paint, and paper, glass, lead, paint, and I can't say it. What was that? T. T. It was on the T. If there's one lesson to learn from all of history, it's this. Don't mess with the Brits' tea. If we just learn that one simple rule, there may never have been a revolution, and we would be drinking the king's brew to this day. It's plain and simple. The Townshend Acts also included within it the Revenue Act, the Indemnity Act, the Commissioners of Customs Act, the New York Restraining Act, and the Vice Admiralty Court Act to force compliance with the taxes. This hit one place in particularly very hard, Boston Harbor. Because, I know this is maybe a shock to you, the taxes greatly hurt the commerce and economy of Boston. Because all of Boston's economy centered around the port, which was about trade and commerce, and thus there was great loss of jobs and much economic hardship that was coming from all this. Tensions began to mount, especially towards those admiralty courts, these offices that were charged with enforcing all of this, to the point there was a skirmish in front of one on March 5th of 1770. It is now known today as the Boston Massacre. I do not have time to go into the events, the details of that event. Suffice to say this: do you know who the British soldier's attorney was for the trial? His name was John Adams. No one else in all the land would defend them in court. But John Adams was a man of such character that he did not think anyone's rights should be deprived, even those with whom we may have disagreement with. And therefore, though it cost him greatly in his practice and even the security of his family, he stood up for them and was their defense attorney. And actually won the case. And they were found not guilty in the trial. Of Massachusetts jury, citizens of Massachusetts, found them not guilty. None of them were from Boston, but that's besides the point. So he was very picky in his jury selection. But anyway, so tensions are rather high, as you can understand. So many of these taxes were repealed and not replaced, except for one. What is the lesson to learn from history? Yes. You need to understand that nearly half the population drank tea at least twice a day. The Swedish professor Peter Kalm said back in 1748 that tea had even replaced milk as the breakfast beverage. Don't anybody tell Mr. Braun, okay? It was here's what happened, to illustrate to you. They were told, you're going to get one brand of tea, the English tea. It's a good brand. It's better than the cheap stuff you've been bringing in through the black market as well. It's a good brand. It's a good brew. It's the only choice you have, though, and it's even cheaper than what you've been paying for other stuff. So I don't understand what the big deal is, except that because of the deal the British Parliament had worked out, they're making a lot of money off of it. But why do you care? Let me say it like this for you Americans. If the United States government today were to say, in Washington, D.C., the Department of Agriculture that handles food and other types of distribution is going to determine one and only one brand of coffee to be available in the entire country and will set the price for it. No other options. If you are found to have any other brew of coffee in your home, you're going to prison with no trial by jury. Don't tell me there wouldn't be a revolution. All of this that has led up to this point led to a protest on the evening of December 16th, 1773, in which around 100 men boarded the Dartmouth, the Eleanor, and the Beaver, supply ship sitting in Boston Harbor, and proceeded to throw off 342 chests full of tea, equaling around 90,000 pounds of tea, 45 tons. It turned Boston Harbor brown, killed all the fish, and when the wind blew in from the east through the harbor, it smelled like dead fish in saltwater tea. Whew. Many different approaches have been taken in recounting the history of that, some with great glamour, others with great ridicule for what was done, because it was a crime, what was done. Yet some of the details regarding are quite interesting. They did zero violation to the ships. Nothing was damaged. In fact, there was one lock that was found to have been broken in the matter, and it was replaced the next day. They even swept up after they were finished. Still, it was quite the ordeal. We even have, history has preserved for us, a special photograph. This is David Kinnison. He was 37 years old when he participated in the Boston Tea Party.
Photography. And this is his actual photograph. One of the men who participated in the Boston Tea Party. He died, by the way, at the age of 115. This event was costly. It single-handedly bankrupted the British East India Company. They had already had great financial difficulties from the Seven Years' War and all the other stuff going on, but this was a backbreaker for the company. The king now has to try to rebuild the treasury with his largest business in the empire having gone bankrupt. To put this into perspective just a little bit, does anybody know who the single largest employer is in the United States? I believe I heard. Walmart. Walmart currently employs somewhere around 2.3 million people in the United States. The next two largest, one is Amazon with 1.6 million, and then Allied Universal, which does janitorial and security service, stuff like that, with 800,000. Those two combined is 2.4 million. So the next two largest in the entire country are about the same as just Walmart alone. Can you imagine what would happen to the U.S. economy if in one night Walmart went bankrupt? It would be absolutely devastating to the economy. That's what has happened in this event. Benjamin Franklin was in England at the time, having been a voice on behalf of the colonies. His reaction when he heard of what had happened was not a pleasant one. He was livid. He was fearful of what the king's reaction would be. He immediately set to write back to as many people as he could in the colonies, and particularly those of the Sons of Liberty in Massachusetts, and say, I don't know what happened, don't care why, we need to fix this. And he called on all the colonists to pay back the debt of what had happened. He himself willing to personally contribute to the